A married couple walked into a police station. They told Detective Joseph Stachula that the wife had been possessed, not once, not twice, but 3 separate times. According to them, the spirit belonged to a woman who had been murdered 6 months earlier. Under normal circumstances, Detective Stachula probably would have asked them to leave. Instead, he picked up a pen and wrote down a name, because he quickly realized that hidden inside this unbelievable story were details the police had never released to the public. Stachula decided to follow those leads. That decision would eventually send a murderer to prison. This isn't a ghost story told around a campfire. It's a real criminal case, one that later became known as Voice from the Grave. Today, we're looking at one of the strangest and most controversial murder cases in American history. Today's story begins with Teresita Basa. Born in the Philippines in 1929, she grew up in a wealthy family that placed a strong emphasis on education. She studied music and eventually earned a master's degree. Like many well-educated Filipinos of her generation, Teresita immigrated to the United States during the 1960s to begin a new chapter in her life. She wasn't running away from anything. She was pursuing a career, a dream, and a future she wanted to build with her own 2 hands. By the winter of 1977, Teresita had settled into a quiet and orderly life in Chicago. She worked as a respiratory therapist at Edgewater Hospital. She lived alone on the 15th floor of an apartment building on North Pine Grove Avenue. Her coworkers remembered her as hardworking, kind, and humble. She was also genuinely generous. From time to time, she would ask one of her coworkers to help with small jobs around her apartment, and she would always pay him for his time. To Teresita, it was nothing more than a simple act of trust. She never imagined that one small act of kindness would eventually lead to the final chapter of her life. February 21st, 1977. Like any other day, Teresita finished work at around 5:30 p.m. She left Edgewater Hospital and returned to her apartment on North Pine Grove Avenue. At around 7:10 p.m., a friend called her. The two spoke for about 20 minutes. During the conversation, Teresita mentioned that a man would be coming over that evening. A short time later, another friend, Ruth Loeb, called. They talked for more than 20 minutes. Once again, Teresita mentioned that she was expecting a male visitor. She never revealed who he was. No one knew that this would be the last time they would ever hear her voice. About an hour later, at around 8:40 p.m., the apartment manager noticed smoke coming from the 15th floor and immediately called the fire department. Firefighters arrived quickly, and the fire was soon brought under control. The apartment fell silent once again, until firefighters entered the bedroom. While checking for anyone trapped inside, they found a woman lying on the floor. She showed no signs of life. The woman was 47-year-old Teresita Basa. At first, everyone believed she had died in the fire, but the autopsy quickly changed that conclusion. Teresita had suffered multiple stab wounds. She had been murdered before the fire ever began. Investigators also noticed that her clothing had been disturbed, raising the possibility that the attack may have involved sexual assault. But the fire had destroyed much of the physical evidence. Even after a thorough examination, investigators were unable to determine whether a sexual assault had actually occurred. There was something else. The apartment had clearly been searched. Jewelry and other valuables were missing. Police quickly realized the fire had not been an accident. It had been deliberately set to destroy evidence and cover up a murder. Police immediately launched a homicide investigation, but the biggest obstacle wasn't the lack of suspects, it was the lack of evidence. The fire had destroyed many of the clues investigators might otherwise have relied on. Detectives interviewed Teresita's co-workers, friends, neighbors, and anyone who might have known her. From the final phone calls Teresita made that evening, investigators learned that she had been expecting a male visitor. Police soon identified that visitor. His name was Alan Showery. He worked with Teresita at Edgewater Hospital. From time to time, Teresita would ask Alan to help with small jobs around her apartment and would pay him for his time. That evening, she had asked him to come over and take a look at her television. According to Showery, he went to her apartment as requested. He admitted that he had been there, but he said he couldn't fix the television and left shortly afterward. At the time, detectives found no evidence that contradicted his account. There were no eyewitnesses placing him at the apartment afterward, no forensic evidence linking him to the murder, and none of the stolen property had been traced back to him. Without evidence, the investigation gradually moved away from Alan Showery. Meanwhile, investigators discovered something unusual among Teresita's belongings. A handwritten note. It read, "Get theater tickets for AS." Teresita had a habit of thanking people who helped her with small gifts. Investigators believed the note may have been a reminder to buy theater tickets as a thank you for Alan Showery after he helped with the television. For the moment, however, that note led nowhere. All investigators knew was that Teresita had lived a quiet and ordinary life. She had no known enemies. The only thing police could say with certainty was that some of her jewelry and other valuables had been stolen. For a time, investigators believed robbery might have been the motive, but beyond that, they had almost nothing. No eyewitnesses, no physical evidence capable of identifying the killer. No one knew what had happened inside that apartment on the night of February 21st. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. 6 months passed. The investigation reached a dead end. Until something happened in Evanston, just north of Chicago, that would completely change the course of the case. A woman named Remy Chua worked at Edgewater Hospital. She knew Teresita. She had also worked with Alan Showery. Several months after the murder, her husband, Dr. Jose Chua, began noticing something unusual. Without warning, Remy would suddenly fall into a trance-like state. When she regained consciousness, she had no memory of what had just happened. But while she was in that state, her voice changed, her mannerisms changed. According to Dr. Chua, the presence speaking through her claimed to be Teresita Basa. The voice said she had been murdered. It named her killer, Alan Showery, their former co-worker. At first, Dr. Chua didn't believe it. He had no connection to the investigation. He later said that, before his wife began speaking, he knew almost nothing about the details of the murder. But the episodes continued, a second time, then a third. Each time, the voice revealed more information. It claimed that Alan had stolen Teresita's jewelry, and that he had given part of it to his girlfriend. After the third episode, Dr. Chua finally decided to contact the police. The case was assigned to Detective Joseph Stakula. As a homicide detective, he had heard countless strange stories over the years, but this one was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Still, there was something he couldn't ignore. The information wasn't vague, it was specific. A name, a possible motive, a description of stolen property, details that had never been made public. Detective Stakula wrote everything down. Then he made a decision. He would reopen the investigation into Alan Showery. Police brought Alan Showery in for questioning once again. His story hadn't changed. He said he had gone to Teresita's apartment to repair her television. He couldn't fix it, so he left. But this time, detectives weren't trying to verify his story, they were trying to verify the voice. Following the information provided by the Chuas, investigators contacted Alan Showery's girlfriend. During the interview, detectives noticed she was wearing a pearl ring. They asked where it had come from. She said Alan had given it to her. Detectives then asked whether he had given her any other jewelry. He had. She agreed to cooperate and turned over the jewelry Alan had given her. Among the items was a jade pendant. Teresita's family and close friends were asked to examine the jewelry. They immediately recognized it. The pearl ring, the jade pendant, both had belonged to Teresita Basa. For the first time since the murder, investigators had more than a theory, more than a suspicion, and more than a story they couldn't verify. They had a name, and now they had physical evidence connecting that name to the crime, the stolen jewelry, and a handwritten note left by Teresita herself, a note that no one had realized would one day become so important. Alan Showery was brought in for questioning again. This time, the detectives weren't simply asking questions, they were closing in. Faced with the recovered jewelry, Alan Showery's story began to fall apart. After repeated questioning, he finally confessed. According to his statement, he did go to Teresita's apartment that night. When he first arrived, Teresita was still on the phone. It was the same phone call she had been having with her friend, Ruth Loeb. He waited outside until the conversation ended. Once she hung up, Teresita let him inside to look at the broken television. He pretended that he couldn't fix it, claiming he didn't have the right tools. He left the apartment, but only a short time later, he changed his mind. At the time, he was behind on his rent and struggling financially. Teresita had always treated him kindly. She often paid him extra for helping around her apartment. According to his confession, after leaving the building, he decided to go back and rob her. A short time later, he returned to the apartment. Believing he had come back to continue repairing the television, Teresita let him inside once again. As she turned toward the door, he grabbed her from behind and rendered her unconscious. He then took a kitchen knife from inside her apartment and stabbed her in the chest. Afterward, he searched the apartment. He found only $22 in cash. Disappointed, he took her jewelry instead. To mislead investigators, he pulled apart her clothing to make the scene appear as though a sexual assault had occurred. He then placed a mattress over her body, set it on fire, and left the apartment, hoping the blaze would destroy the evidence. Later, he gave the stolen jewelry to his girlfriend as a belated Christmas present. According to his confession, the robbery itself had been premeditated. He claimed he didn't decide to rob Teresita until after leaving her apartment the first time. He also insisted that he hadn't originally intended to kill her. He said the murder happened only after the robbery spiraled out of control, and that he set the fire afterward in an attempt to cover up the crime. For a brief moment, it appeared that the case had finally been solved. But when the case moved toward trial, Alan Showery changed his story. He withdrew his confession. He claimed it had not been voluntary. According to Showery, detectives had already revealed details of the case during the interrogation and threatened to charge both him and his pregnant girlfriend with murder unless he confessed. The question would now be left to a jury: who was telling the truth, the man who confessed, then took it all back, or the mysterious voice that had pointed investigators toward him in the first place? The trial began in Chicago in January 1979. Before long, newspapers had given it a name: the Voice from the Grave trial. Over the course of 8 days, the courtroom heard a story that sounded more like fiction than reality. Prosecutors called 13 witnesses. They presented the recovered jewelry, Teresita's handwritten note, and Alan Showery's confession. But the testimony that drew international attention came from Remy Chua. She told the jury that, on 3 separate occasions, Teresita Basa had spoken through her. The defense took a very different approach. Rather than trying to disprove the supernatural claims, they tried to explain them. The defense argued that Remy Chua knew far more about the case than she appeared to. She had previously filed a workplace complaint involving Alan Showery, but according to the defense, the conflict between them went even deeper. Remy had once worked with both Teresita and Alan at Edgewater Hospital. She had later been dismissed from her job. She believed Alan had privately complained about her work performance to hospital administrators, contributing to her dismissal. The defense also argued that the day before her first alleged possession, Remy had just lost her job. She also believed Alan had made a prank phone call to harass her. In addition, she had visited Teresita's apartment before. She knew Teresita well, and she already knew that Alan had been scheduled to go there to repair the television that night. The defense's argument was straightforward. Perhaps there had never been a ghost at all. Perhaps the information had simply come from someone who already knew far more than people realized. After 13 hours of deliberation, the jury was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. The judge declared a mistrial after the jewelry, the handwritten note, the confession, and testimony that had captivated the world's media. The trial ended without a verdict. A second trial never took place. On February 23, 1979, Alan Showery pleaded guilty to murder, robbery, and arson. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison. There was no second jury, no new wave of headlines about the voice from the grave, just a quiet plea agreement that brought one of the strangest criminal cases in American history to an end. To this day, no one has been able to fully explain what happened to Remy Chua. Some believe that in some way, she truly became the voice of something beyond human understanding. Others believe that her mind pieced together information she didn't consciously realize she already knew, and when those memories surfaced, they felt so real that both she and her husband interpreted them as possession. One fact, however, has never been in dispute. The information she gave the police was accurate. She identified the right man. She led investigators to the stolen jewelry that they otherwise had no way of finding. And she reopened a murder investigation that had long since reached a dead end. But the story didn't end with the plea agreement. In 1979, a book titled A Voice from the Grave turned Teresita's story into a best-selling account. In 1990, the television series Unsolved Mysteries introduced the case to millions of viewers. Even today, the true crime community continues to debate the very same question that Detective Joseph Stakula was forced to confront the day that married couple walked into his office. Was it merely an extraordinary coincidence? Was it subconscious knowledge disguised as something supernatural, or was it something that science still cannot explain? Teresita Basa never lived to see a jury convict her killer, but in the end, no matter how it happened, the final voice was hers.